welcome back. Let's get started. We have our document all set up. We are at 1920 by 1080. We can see that when we click on our artboard tool and look in our properties palette. We have our palettes all set up the way we want with layers and swatches and color and properties and Pathfinder and align. Those are our main ones. I've also added in transparency over here. Let's just drag this over here above Pathfinder. And while we're at it, sometimes it's nice to have the stroke palette. So we're going to add these few in here. You can see we got crunched down a little bit. Maybe we'll put a line and Pathfinder together for now and leave it like this. So we've got layers, swatches, color, properties, stroke, transparency, Pathfinder, and align with little libraries hidden back there just in case I need it. Let's go back to the item tool. So we are ready to go. We have our document set up, and we're going to make a colorful mosaic using straight lines with the pen tool and focus a little bit also on this direct selection tool, which is access to the A on your keyboard to manipulate individual points. Let's get started. All right, so now that you have created your own mosaic, we're going to focus specifically on the direct selection tool. We've got the selection tool at the top, which is the black one, but the white one is the direct selection tool. And that is for manipulating individual points. This one is for moving shapes around, objects, and this one is for moving points within an object around, right? So you're not going to use the white direct selection tool to move this around, even though you can get away with it. But you really want this for object-based movements, whereas this for point-based movements. And so I just contradicted myself, Command-Z. You could also hold down the Shift key and manipulate 2 points at once. Hold down Shift key, 3 points at once, but let's not do that right now. Deselect by clicking off of the shape. Okay, now that you have your own mosaic drawn, we're going to go to the direct selection tool, A, and we are going to manipulate individual points. And so to do that, let's go to the View menu and make sure that Snap to everything is off right now. But we do want Smart Guides on. So Command U, Smart Guides on, everything else Snap to should be off, and zoom in. Hold down A, click on A for the direct selection tool, and click on individual point. And I'm going to hover, I'm going to drag it until I see the word intersect. Or in this case, until I see the word guide. Intersect was because it was two guides that are together. But what I'm trying to do is drag my points so that they line up to the guides. And with Smart Guides on, it gives me a sense of when I'm sticking to the guide. So we're going to just pull our little points, and what we're doing is we're practicing the direct selection tool. It's a very big part of the pen tool. The pen tool doesn't exist on its own. We need to be able to manipulate individual points once we've created shapes with the pen tool, and that is through the direct selection tool. So a close friend of the pen tool, the direct selection tool, allows us to move around. Now, holding down the space bar, I'm going to drag the artboard around. Holding down spacebar, Command or Control, I'm going to zoom in, hold A for direct selection, and pulling towards the guide until I see the word guide. So I'm just pulling all my points to the margins. And there's no rule of thumb here. We just do it as our eye follows our hand and our hand follows our eye. We're just pulling points, and this is an art project. This does not have to be super precise. If one of these points is not on the margin, it's okay. We're going to do our best. But the point of this is not that every point is precise. The point of this is to learn how to use Smart Guides with the direct selection tool and normal guides to, I'm going to actually make an additional point, to manipulate shapes and points. Now, how did he do that? So he's using he's using the direct selection tool, but I quickly went to the add anchor point tool, and I can hover over a path, create a new point, go back to the direct selection tool, and then just move only that point. I'm going to use my mouse scroll wheel here to scooch up, leave that alone. Actually, I will pull this here. So then we have a point that we don't really need. So I'm going to go to my delete anchor point tool, but this one doesn't seem like it's now on the guide. So let's make sure that's on the guide. Let's zoom in, pull it off, back on. There it is. Space bar, controller command, and then option to zoom out. Back to the direct selection tool, and we are creating our mosaic, which now conforms to the margins. Now when I'm done with this, you're going to pause the video, go back if you need to review anything, but we are using our direct selection tool, which is accessible with the A key, Command 0 to zoom to fit in screen, Command 0 or Control 0. I'm using the direct selection tool to manipulate points of our shapes that we did a bit of a free draw with without any curves, and we are then Command Z all the time. I'm accidentally selecting the object, and I really want to be selecting this individual point. So if you ever select the wrong thing, just Command Z. Don't try to push it back to where it was. Always Command Z or Control Z for undo. So I'm manipulating individual points using my direct selection tool with smart guides on, pulling the points to the margins. Great. So let's pause here. If you need any time to catch up, make sure that your shapes conform to the edges of the margins. Now, if that's done, we are going to continue on our journey here with the direct selection tool. And I'm going to just start making my lines line up as I see them with my eye. Meaning I'm going to create the order that I want. It doesn't have to be any particular width. I don't have to make sure that they're all the same, widths in terms of the little channels between these shapes. But what I want to get in the habit of now at this moment is using the direct selection tool interchangeably with the pen tool. So I'm going to go back to the pen tool, and I'm going to hover over a point. I don't even have to go to the add anchor point tool. I can just hover over, make another point. And in this case, I'm going to press A for direct selection, pull that down to here, and then P for pen tool. Actually, A for direct selection. Good. And I'll keep using the direct selection tool until I need to go back to the pen tool to create additional points. It's kind of the rule of thumb. So I'm going to use P. I see a little spot here that I want to fill. No curves. Great. Back to the A for direct selection, back to P for the pen tool, back to A for direct selection. You can see how this works. So this is really, there's only two keys that I need to be focused on. One is the P, and the other is direct selection for A. And I'm just going to start making this kind of matrix work for me. My left hand is always on the keyboard. And I'm always ready to hit the P or the A tool, the A key. All right, so here we are, down here. Just kind of manipulate this. Oops, Command Z. If your left hand is not resting on your keyboard, if you're a righty, then something's wrong, something's missing, because you can't hit Command Z quick enough. That's going to slow you down. If there's many reasons to have your left hand resting on the keyboard, or if you're a left-handed, have your right hand resting on the keyboard. But Command Z is the most important, because we can't work as artists unless we are able to fail, and that means being able to make bad lines and know that it's not a big deal to get ourselves out of them. Everything can't be so careful and you know, the whole advantage of digital art is that we can make mistakes and quickly erase them. And so why have a delay there? So you need to have your left hand close to Command Z. Command Z needs to be intuitive. You don't have to think about it. I'm surprised when I meet adults that still have not learned that, even if they're not artists, that keyboard shortcut, because for me it's been such a, as we say in Boston, a game changer. All right, so now we have our mosaic built. I might want to just get rid of any little gaps along the edges for now. So I'm just going to pull these lines. I don't really want any gaps that touch the margins. So I'm going to actually, in the end, remove those. You can see I'm removing points. I'm editing myself, part of the artistic process. And to do that in Illustrator, you have to understand a few tools, not all the tools, just a few. The pen tool, the direct selection tool. Right now, that's all we're using. So now my mosaic, I'm going to turn off my guides. And I'm going to zoom out by holding down Shift, Command or Control, and then Option or Alt to zoom out. Hold down Spacebar just to move around. And I can see my shape. That's a great little mosaic. So now we're going to select all, Command A, and instead of a white fill with a black stroke, I'm going to reverse that and do a black fill with a white stroke. So you can see this little swap fill and stroke. It's also Shift X for keyboard command. And then I'm going to hit on the stroke to bring that to the foreground here. And I'm going to take away the stroke. So we don't want any outline. Illustrator calls this a stroke. Every object in Illustrator has a fill and a stroke. So now the stroke is set to none, but the fill is black for all of these. Now let's deselect. So now we have our mosaic made, straight lines. We've practiced our pen tool. We've practiced our direct selection tool. Let's get a little bit colorful. I would like to hold down direct selection tool, or actually let's just use the item tool. Click on one shape, hold down Shift, click on a second, kind of far away, a third, and a fourth, let's say, and choose a color for those four. Holding down Shift, select 4 objects. Holding down Shift, now deselect by clicking somewhere off into space, and 1, 2, 3, 4, and choose a color. Don't spend a lot of time on the color, it doesn't matter. I'm going to use direct selection tool as I see little spots that I want to edit. Great. Back to the direct selection tool, which is V in my keyboard. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go with and I'll see what I can do to figure this out. I might just use the eyedropper tool. Hold down I, and I can select something and then borrow a color from somewhere else. Now I'm going to hold down Command to switch quickly to the item tool, so I can click on this one, but switches back to the eyedropper tool, and I'll choose it's always interesting to make mosaics work color-wise. No. Command Z. Sometimes I like blur my eyes. I can see use force that might have to work. I like to figure out a way so that no color is touching itself. No repeated colors next to one another. Sort of doing that here. Okay, so we're gonna leave that just like that. Now, I think our mosaic would be helped by a little background color. And I'm going to show you how I use layers to help me manage things like creating a background. There's no place in Illustrator just to quickly change your background color. You have to create your own object that is exactly the size of your artboard and then give it a color. So I'm going to go to the layers palette and just lock my, give it a name too, double click. I'm going to call that art. And then I'm going to make a new layer, drag it below the art layer, and call this BG for background. Then I'm going to go to my rectangle tool. Just click once anywhere in space in the artboard. I'm going to just choose 1920 by 1080, the exact size of our artboard, and click OK. Just make this black for now. Now, it's not in the right spot. I could try to eyeball it. I don't want to eyeball it. I want to go to the transform tool and make sure this little top left button in my little grid here is selected, and choose 0 and 0 from my XY coordinates. And that way I know that my black background shape is exactly hovering in the, exactly centered on my artboard. Deselect. And now I'm going to lock my background layer. And I can go back to my art layer, turn on guides. I can choose A, and if I see anything I want to change, maybe I want to add like a few more shapes, or I didn't like that, so I'm just going to delete it. Let's leave this alone. And that's our mosaic. So we made our straight line mosaic. You could always duplicate that layer of art and hide the first one, and then try some new color combinations. Holding down Shift, let's click on all of our greens. Let's go here to red, holding down all of these greens. Let's go to orange, holding down the blues. Using Shift, let's go to pink, or something a little less magenta-y, and then hold down the gray. Looks like we missed this. I'm gonna hold down the eyedropper tool, and I think those are the pink ones. So then this, Shift in, let's go to something yellow, not as yellow. Great. So now we have a different feel. So that's the second mosaic we did really quickly. First one was kind of a blue feel, and then we could just, keep going. You duplicate that, hide the other ones, hold down Shift, choose all of these. Let's leave the pink. This time we're going to go with purple. Get rid of our gold, make that into a different red. And that's already a different vibe, but could leave that alone actually. So very quickly, we have 3 different styles. And if we got crazy, we could just take one of them and use the rotate tool, select all, and turn it around. So now we've got one that looks like that as opposed to this. And then taking it another step, you could kind of leave one on and use we haven't talked about the transparency tool, but just as a little bonus step, you could open up your window transparency and start trying out different ways that the two mosaics interact. So I've got one layer on top that I've selected and is using I'm going to lock the bottom layer. I'm going to drag the entire contents of that top layer and group it so I don't get into trouble. Command G, under the item menu, would have been there. And that whole, because I've grouped it, it's now, let's see, ungroup it for a second. Looks like all of these things are, the whole layer is a multiply layer. So there's several ways to make things relate to one another via layers. But in this case, I've selected the entire layer using this little button here in the layer palette to make this layer a multiply layer. I'm going to undo that for 1 second because I don't want the whole layer to be a multiply layer. I want really the objects on it to be a multiply layer. It's a bit of a subtle difference, but I'm going to Command A, select everything on the layer, the layers are locked, so I know nothing's accidentally selected from those other layers. I'm going to Command G for group, and I'm going to choose under the transparency menu, multiply. Same result, but in this case, I could add something else to this layer and have it not be a multiply effect, which has a little bit more control for me. I don't want the whole layer to be multiplied, just the object on the layer. The top one showing on the first one, we can create some interesting combinations. I think this one is a bit more effective. And I encourage you to experiment. But the point is to use the pen tool, to use the direct selection tool, to use your layers, to not get bogged down by curves and trying to be precise, to let your mind wander a bit, to let your basic instincts kind of take over while we learn only a few parts of the pen tool and a few other tools like the direct selection tool and the selection tool. So thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for creating your artwork. Let's finish up and move on to the next project, which is going to be tracing fruit, to learn how to create curves with the pen tool. So we're going to borrow some photography and start tracing fruit, and it's going to be a lot of fun. So thanks for doing this. Let's move on to project number 2.